Good morning. It's Saturday, and I am excited to share with you today the story of Inchelina. So Inchelina is also known as Thumbelina. That's the name that I was familiar with growing up. And this story is fascinating because it's really about something that I think touches a lot of us, especially those of us who consider ourselves spiritual and perceive our past as being marked by this idea that we don't belong, we don't fit in. I mean, this goes beyond obviously people who are just on a spiritual journey, but that's just a commonality you tend to see in a group like that. And this story really speaks to that specifically. The story is about this woman who she doesn't have a husband and is lonely and would like to have a child. So once again, as we talked about before, this idea of generativity comes in right at the beginning. This inability for the couple, or in this case the woman, to be able to have a child. So when we expand this idea, it goes beyond just having a child. It actually is speaking to something else, and that is the ability to create new life. And as I've talked about before, in a Western culture that prefers the kind of the literal, logical, analytical brain to other ways of knowing, we tend to look to the past for ways to go forward. And when we do that, we miss out, because if we're in a new situation, we can't look to the past, because the past can't come up with a solution for something that it doesn't know because it hasn't encountered it before. So what these situations always call for is other ways of knowing. So in this situation, the setup again is that the mother is there, soon to be mother, and the father is missing. So what does the masculine then bring in energetically? So on an energetic level, it's the action. It's knowing when to establish like a boundary and go forward. Like, okay, this situation is done. This situation has outlived its usefulness. It's time for me to move on. Or even something on an internal level, like I have this gift and this gift should be out in the world. And so a healthy masculine has the ability to be able to help you navigate taking something that's inside and bringing it into the outside and making it manifest. So when this is missing, we can kind of have this idea that the feminine probably will be disempowered, because that would be the energy that would be missing, right? The energy to go forward, the energy to know what to do, and to receive the idea of what to do, and then to move forward. So there's no evolution. And what happens when there's too much feminine and not enough masculine is there's like this kind of stuckness, there's a complacency, there's this like kind of spinning wheels and not being able to move forward. But luckily, life doesn't want you to stay stuck. It doesn't want things to stay the same. Life has this desire for growth, right? The seed becomes the tree, the nut becomes the tree. Like there's this desire for something to become what it's meant to be. And so life usually has a say in how this kind of stuff goes. So the mother is lonely, and she looks outside of herself for fulfillment. So what she does is she goes to the local witch and she gives her 12 pennies and she says, I want a baby. And the witch gives her a barley seed and says, plant it, take care of it, and then you'll get what you want. So in contrast, which we saw last week when we talked about Rapunzel, it's really the very similar situation, which you can see, like as I said before, is that these stories are similar because there are similar issues in our time that we're all working through, and we might resonate with different stories in different ways, and that will give us information about how to move forward. Typically, the information goes into the unconscious and works at that level. So it's kind of guiding us in guiding the soul, even though we may not be aware of it. In a Jungian perspective on dreams or fairy tales and myths, we can look at all of the characters are aspects of the heroine. All characters then are contributing somehow. So as the characters in the story change around the heroine, what we see is how consciousness is evolving. Okay, so back to the witch. So she represents an energy that is contributing to the birth of this new child. And this new child then carries that part of that energy because that's where the seed came from. The seed didn't come from the mother who can't have the child, but came from the witch who knows how to create life. So the mother gets the seed, she takes it home, the barley seed, she plants it, she waters it and takes care of it. It sprouts, and then a little tulip bulb that is red and yellow comes out, and the mother kisses it, and it opens up, and there's this little inch-high child. So what is this telling us at this point? At this point, we would look at the colors of the tulip, because really up until this point, we haven't talked about any colors. And quite honestly, for the balance of the story, I don't think there are any other colors. So these are the only colors. So this is like a dream. So if you have a dream and this happens, but there's no other colors mentioned any place else in the story, then you want to look, okay, well, are these colors significant? So looking at red in terms of archetypally and in relation to the chakras, I highly recommend Ambiko Waters' book, The Chakras and Their Archetypes, I think it's called. And she talks about the first chakra, which would be the red, being related to the mother and the victim, right? Isn't that interesting? So the mother here would represent, so in a healthy situation, we would be constellating the mother archetype, and that would relate to the ability to nourish, the ability to nurture, safety, security, abundance. Like all of these things would be related to that. In the negative, it would constellate a victim, like the mother going to the witch to get the answer, to get the fulfillment, to get what she needs because she can't do it herself. That then indicates that this could be an issue in the story going forward. The other color then is yellow, which yellow is the third chakra, and according to Waters, it is the warrior and the servant. So third chakra yellow has to do with empowerment, and in this sense, warrior isn't the typical way that we think of warrior. It's not the typical kind of, I personally wouldn't choose that label, but I find her stuff to be generally like really spot on. So the warrior then is not somebody who sees the world as bad or an enemy that needs to be fought. It sees all of that, all that's in the world as being on our side, on my side, conspiring to help me grow, conspiring to help me live my dreams, inspiring me, and conspiring to help me bring what's inside out into the world. And so all the situations that come along, which we'll see in this story and in our own lives, have the intention of assisting us. So the warrior is not looking at the world as the enemy. The warrior is able to establish boundaries, able to establish a sense of self, and be able to stand up for oneself, be able, in much the same way, in just thinking about empowerment. If the energy in the solar plexus is on the other side, which we would kind of call not so healthy, would be the servant. And that would be somebody that takes care of somebody else, that takes care of other people's needs, put other people's needs in front of their own. So this is what the issues going forward to be. So red would be victim or mother, and the solar plexus would be warrior or servant. So let's see how much these relate as we go forward. We could consider the stem of the flower, just assuming that it's green, and that would be related to the heart chakra. So this idea with the heart chakra archetypally, she speaks to as being about the actor or the lover. So somebody who genuinely feels love and acts that way, or someone who either represses their sense of love or doesn't really have access to it. So when the flower opens, you get this little inch-high little girl, and I mean, like, really, that's like a doll. I mean, what would you do? I mean, it's that's really tiny. I mean, what would you? It's if you're like a full-grown human being. I mean, it's not like you could do anything with it. And so she sets up this little bowl for water and gives her a little walnut shell for a bed, and she could use it, to go like a boat in the bowl of water. And the mother enjoys the singing. But you have to wonder, like, has this mother really thought this through? Has she really thought, like, what happens to this child when I'm not here? Like, there's no thinking about the implications of her actions, the mother. She's not thinking about the child. She's only thinking about herself and what she wants and needs. So in doing that, it's kind of like she's taken this life form of this little child, and now the life serves her, right? And we talked about this in terms of the yellow. So this sets Inchelina up to be a servant and to be immersed in that energy of serving others over self. And so that is something we'll keep an eye out as we persist, as we progress through the story. This could be like a narcissistic parent whose their needs are what always takes precedence. What happens to the child in this situation is they don't know who they are. They don't know what they need. They don't know what they want. There's kind of this uncertainty because as they go through life, as they grow up and become, get their own psychologies kind of established, it's this sense of always giving over to somebody else. So there's no question about her and what she needs and wants. So she doesn't really have her own identity. She's kind of enmeshed with the mother. And everything is, in that sense, about the mother. So this initial situation, so we can look at it a couple of ways. So there's this barley seed, which gives birth to this little girl, which really doesn't make sense, right? Why a barley seed? I mean, that's a grain. It's not a flower. And I mean, as far as I know, it's not a flower. And she obviously isn't that. She's like 1 inch long and a little girl. So she's not being birthed from something that is, but we could look at it in a more abstract way and say the seed for what she becomes is in nature. But she's birthed to a mother who's not the same as her. So it's like, once again, you see, like in The Wizard of Oz or in other stories, this kind of orphan archetype where you don't belong and you don't fit in. And it's what I was talking about at the beginning. And so if you've read my blog, I wrote a post about this, about belonging and not belonging. And there actually are gifts in not belonging. We often talk about like how important belonging is, but not belonging also has a quality to it that is very positive. And that is that belonging often can involve conforming and in order to belong. And so there can be that what happens in a group is that there's usually a commonality. And so, for example, I'm vegan. And so in a group of vegans, we would all be, not eating animal products. But if I'm vegan because of my dreams, which is true, and the group or people in the group are vegan because they have strong beliefs around animals and animal cruelty, and that's why they're vegan, then if I showed up with a leather coat, that would be offensive to people in the group. And so I might not wear a leather coat to the group because I know that it could offend some people. So in a situation like that, I would be curtailing my own behavior. And of course, this is kind of a superficial example. But in ways that are much more important, we can conceal parts of ourselves and ignore parts of ourselves and hide parts of ourselves because they don't fit in with the group and the group's rules, the group's expectations. This can go with religion, it can go with your family, it can go with your culture, it can go with all kinds of things where you're expected to conform in order to fit in. So not belonging means you're in this situation, you're looking around and you're saying, well, this person isn't like me, or this doesn't feel like me, the situation or whatever. And in that case, what may happen is there is this questioning. Well, if I am not like this, then who am I? And it can really be the seed, let's say, for the birth of something new. And it's something that doesn't conform to that group or, family, religion, whatever. And you hear lots of stories about like this, right? Where people have that sense of they're different. They have that sense of questioning their religion. They have all these things, and that's the seed that kind of says like, oh, I don't quite fit in here, right? So it creates this quest for discovery and the desire to look deeper. So that can be somewhat superficial, right? To look outside and say, I'm like this or I'm like that, and establish one's identity based on that, which typically was what happens in childhood. But now if we go deeper, that impulse that I've talked about, that sense that I don't fit in here comes from inside. It doesn't come from outside. So this allows you to be more open to a new identity. It is not based on what was seen and what was initially kind of maybe taught is you. So you, like if you grew up with a certain religion, then you were taught like, this is who we are. This is our belief. This is our belonging. And so you would begin to kind of see that that might not be your identity, and it wouldn't be based on what was initially taught. So looking inside for answers when the outer doesn't resolve it. Now, what can happen is that if you're conditioned, which most of us, at least here in the West, are, is to to change something outside in order to discover what like how to resolve that impulse or how to fix that. And like I talked about last week, for me, it was like, okay, I'm in this interior design job. I'm a corporate interior designer doing really well, but doesn't quite feel right. So I'm going to move on to another interior design job, or I'm going to move to live near my grandparents. And of course, this was a few years ago. And then I was like, okay, well, let me try sales. Well, that doesn't it. And then we try this. And then I'm going to project coordinator. And so it was like this because I didn't know, you have to go inside to find the answer a few years ago. I didn't see other people doing it. I didn't know anyone who was doing it. I didn't have any, but the impulse was there to move and grow But that wasn't the answer that was supposed to be happening. That wasn't the answer that resolves it. So knowing what I know looking back, it's like, were the signs there? Yup. Was there a dream? Yup. But I didn't understand the language of dreams. I didn't understand the way life works. So I didn't know at that time how to progress forward. But you might say the fairy tales had planted the seeds inside of me about change and about navigating into something that's new. So that may be what compelled me to move forward and move forward and move forward. But the thing is that that wasn't the solution. So Inchelina's journey is going to take her into different situations. Some situations where it's like nothing like her, like the one she was born into. Other situations that are going to hint at and give her an inkling into qualities that she has or things about her that are more true. And so each situation, again, as you'll see this as we progress, which we're not going to get through the whole thing today, we'll go into more of it next week. But as it progresses, you'll see that this kind of movement between like, okay, not like this, but maybe a little bit like this, not like this, but a little bit like this. So what happens? She's asleep at night. Mother is asleep at night, and the two of them are asleep, which means unconscious. They're probably unconscious to the situation that they're in. And like we said, there's the feminine, which means there's this kind of stuckness, and there's no masculine, so there's no ability to move forward. So what happens is that there's a broken window right beside where her bed is, and a frog or toad, comes to the window and takes her in her little bed and is going to take her to marry her son. So she takes her to the river, and she places her little walnut bed on a leaf in the middle of the river. And she goes back to the banks of the river, and she begins to prepare an apartment. And she says to her son, she says, okay, now you need to be quiet because we don't want to wake her up, because we don't want her to know what we're doing here. So the son complies, which again is exactly the same situation. So what's happened is, because there's no growth, there's no ability to expand, she's kind of been deposited into the exact same situation yet again. So we can look at childhood, in particular situations in childhood, and see how there are patterns that repeat and repeat and repeat throughout life. So here we're back in a situation that's repeating what happened in her initial situation with her mother, which is that the mother is deciding for the son, oh, you should marry Inchelina. This is a good idea for you. But the son doesn't seem to have any say in it. This seems to be all about the mother and the mother's idea about the way things should be and the way things should go. I mean, if you talk to the mother and say, what are your motivations? She probably would tell you, oh, it's for the goodness of my son, except that she's not taking him into consideration. And does he want to marry? He's a frog. Does he want to marry a little inch-high little girl? I mean, maybe not. Maybe he'd like to marry a frog. And maybe he doesn't even think that she's, a prize. And it's like the mother kind of grabs the first thing she sees and says, okay, here's a good idea for you, right? So the mother and Inchelina are asleep. So there's no growth. So life is intervening. So we could say this is neglect on the part of the mother for having left the window open, right? There's kind of a lack of boundaries here. There's not a strong boundary and not protection, which we talked about in terms of the first chakra, and the first chakra being about the mother and the victim. So here she's kind of thrown into a victim situation as she's abducted. So she's taken from this situation into another situation. And that's it. Really, on one level, you can say it's it's kind of the mother's neglect or, lack of attention and boundaries. On the other hand, you could say, if we're looking at it from the healthy warrior standpoint, that life is happening for me and this situation is for me, what is it teaching me? Then fate has intervened, moved her out of that old situation and putting her into a new situation. So it is for her good. We just have to see what the lesson is in it. And when we can cultivate the wisdom in the situation, we can move forward. So Inchelina is moving from the known to the unknown, right? And so she's going from what's familiar to what's unfamiliar. So the situation, as I was saying, mirrors that Inchelina had with her mother. Now, in the story, they call the frogs ugly frogs. And so because we are talking about all the characters in the story as aspects of the heroine, we would say this is actually a part of her that is saying, okay, you know what? You should marry this guy. This guy who isn't anything like you, who doesn't live in the same environment you would live in. This guy's nothing. And the mother part of her, Psyche, which replicates the mother in a lot of ways, that's the origin mother, is suggesting that she do something that is not in alignment with who she really is. So in a way, it can be this ugly part is kind of unconscious. It's just an unconscious part of her that's getting her to conform to situations that are not really in alignment. Frogs are associated with water, and she took the shell and brought her to the river, and that is emotion, and it symbolizes the unconscious. So that we could say that this is going to be the beginning of her getting used to emotion and how to navigate that, right? When she's with her mother, she's just in this little bowl of water, all is fine. There is no emotion really happening there. And so now we're coming into an environment that reflects two things, which is the emotion and the unconscious. And like I said, fate intervening, we can sometimes say, is the unconscious intervention. So she is on the water, and mud, which is where the apartment is going to be, is water combined with earth. And so again, the water symbolizes the emotion. Earth symbolizes kind of a groundedness, like, come back to earth, right? Come back down to ground. So there's this need to combine these two things, these elements, and that are considered, mud is considered a generative thing, actually. It's considered, like, sometimes they say that people came from mud or clay, right? This idea that it's a substance that has to do with life. And the river, because it's associated with emotion, when we look at it, like if you have a dream about a river, you would say, well, what were the qualities of it? And so if it's clear and it's moving and it's running, then that can be an indication that the emotions are healthy and that they're moving in a way. So her water, to start with, right? We talked about stagnant, we talked about not moving, and the water's in a bowl. So there is no movement. It's just contained. And so now there's a flow that's going to be started. So since the mother toad doesn't want Inchelina to know what's going on, they're being quiet. That can mean like it's not coming up into consciousness about the situation that you're in or she's in. And so she's still asleep. And so that can be taking a familiar path, a safe path, what feels comfortable, not moving into discomfort, which any new situation is unfamiliar and will evoke some sense of discomfort. The frog mother doesn't really care what the sun wants. And when Inchelina wakes up in the morning, she realizes, oh, this is the situation I'm in. I'm stuck on a leaf in the middle of the river, and that's like an island, and there's no way out. So this is where you become aware in a situation like, okay, this isn't healthy. This isn't for me. This isn't a good idea. I'm in a situation that's not honoring me. Like I was saying in the last video, so and mentioned a little bit earlier, like being in a corporate design job in a way was being stuck. There wasn't growth happening to the soul. There was just this like kind of conforming to society's expectations and my family's beliefs about what is deemed success. And success in our culture is often seen as being the result of a good job and a good paycheck, and then get married, and then have a house, and then have children, and then you're successful. But in terms of the soul, it's not. In terms of the soul, there's a different kind of ruler that measures success. And when the soul is involved, success is measured by how authentic you are with who you truly are. If you're delivering the gifts that you came into this life with, if you're actually sharing them, that is the ruler for success as far as the soul is concerned. So Inchelina is stuck in the river and she begins to cry, which is great, right? Because the emotions are flowing now. She's crying. So this is awesome. It's not so great because really she's fallen into victim mode, right? I'm stuck and there's no way out of this situation. So that's victim. So, right, we're back to the first chakra, the victim archetype. But it is getting things flowing. So in that regard, it is positive. And it's also positive because when that happens, the fish who were under the water caught on to what the mother toad's plan was. And they saw her crying on the leaf. And so they went to the stem of the leaf and they nibbled on it. So we talked about the mud on the side of the bank, but there's also mud under the water. And so this leaf can also represent a connection to the unconscious because it goes down under. And what will begin to happen immediately after this leaf gets moving, she's going to start connecting up. So again, this is something that you'll see in dreams. There's this movement above and below. You'll go upstairs, you'll go downstairs. You'll go down into a basement, up into an attic. You'll go down an escalator, up an elevator. Like you'll see this movement, and this is the weaving of connection between the soul and spirit. So this is the first indication that we have that there's something else going on here. So the connection is severed by the fish, and they represent the ability to navigate the emotion in a way that's healthy, and the ability to navigate the unconscious. So she's going down the river on the leaf, and a butterfly comes along and lands on the leaf. And she's all excited. She ties the ribbon around her waist. She ties to the butterfly, and the butterfly takes off and flies and pulls her along. So they're having a great time. It's so much fun. She's free. She's finally free. And that butterfly represents a part of her. She's beginning to connect, right? So I said the leaf was connected to the below, to the mud, and now she's connecting up to the butterfly. And then what happens is a maybug comes along and picks her up off of the leaf and takes her up and puts her in a tree. So again, now we're going up even higher. So the butterfly was a little bit of ways, but now we're way up in a tree with the maybug. And Inchelina is like, oh no, because she tied the butterfly to the leaf. And how is the butterfly ever going to get free? So there was this part of her that was free, and she inadvertently tied it down and made it not free. So she didn't recognize what she had done, like the mother, until after the fact, the implications of her actions. And what happens? She's abducted again. So I'm going to leave you with that cliffhanger. Isn't this a great story? It is so fascinating. There's so much richness to it for how to navigate through and find this sense of who we are, truly who we are, and to sense of belonging, the sense of home, freedom. All of these things are going to be addressed by this story. So, part 2, next Saturday. Please join me, 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, New York time. So, have a great rest of your Saturday. Thanks for joining me and thanks for watching.